My boots echoed like gunshots on the courthouse marble. I'd spent all night staring at that date on the will, April 12th, until the numbers burned behind my eyes. Now, the folded papers were a live wire in my hand. I spotted him immediately. Cody was leaning against a pillar outside the clerk's office, looking smug and settled, like he already owned the walls around us. The sight of him, so calm, so sure, made the blood roar in my ears. I didn't break stride. "Cody!" He turned, that familiar, condescending half-smile already forming. It vanished when he saw my face. "You think you can steal Dad's ranch with this?" My voice was low, a tight wire of fury. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I shoved the papers hard against his chest, forcing him to grab them. "Look at it! Look at the date!" He unfolded the will, his eyes flicking down to the bottom of the first page. I watched his face, searching for a crack, a flinch. He saw it. April 12th, 2023. "So?" he said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. "So?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Dad was in a coma on April 12th, a medically induced coma. He couldn't hold a spoon, let alone sign a will leaving you everything." I was in his space now, close enough to see the faint pulse in his temple. "This is a fraud. You know it. I know it." Cody's composure slithered back. He carefully refolded the document, his movements slow and deliberate, a performance for anyone watching in the hall. He met my gaze, and the smirk returned, colder than before. "Prove it," he said, the words a quiet challenge. He tapped the will against his palm. "It's dated, it's signed, and it's notarized. It's right here in black and white. You got a theory, Wyatt, a sad little story. I've got a legal document." He took a step back, adjusting his jacket. "See you in front of the judge." He walked away, the will in his hand, and I just stood there, the truth screaming inside me but trapped by paper and ink. He was right. I had to prove it, and I would. Video opens on me, Wyatt, sitting on the porch of our ranch house. I look tired, wearing a worn flannel. I speak directly to the camera. "You want to know how this all started? It wasn't in that lawyer's office. It was right here 3 months ago. The air still had that late winter bite to it. My dad, Silas McCall, was as tough as the Montana granite. Built this place with his own 2 hands. On April 10th, I found him in the barn, slumped over near the old tractor. He wasn't moving right. His words were all slurred. My heart just dropped. I didn't call an ambulance. I loaded him into my truck myself and drove like hell to the hospital in Billings. The whole way, I'm just talking to him, telling him to hang on, that the calves needed him this spring. That was me, the son who stayed, the one who knew every inch of this land because I'd bled on most of it. Then, 2 days later, Cody shows up. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, you could smell him before you saw him. Expensive cologne, a suit that probably cost more than my truck. He hadn't been back in years. Not for Christmas, not when Mom passed. Nothing. But a crisis. Here he was. I was in the hospital cafeteria drinking terrible coffee when he found me. He didn't ask how Dad was. Not really. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. His hands were soft, I remember that, and said, "Wyatt, you look wrecked. You shouldn't have to bear this alone." Empty promises wrapped in a silk tie. He talked about exploring all our options and making sure Dad's legacy is protected. He kept using words like portfolio and liquidity. I just stared at him. Our dad was fighting for his life 2 floors up, and Cody was talking like he was at a board meeting. I'd been the one who'd held Dad's hand while they did the scans. I was the one who'd called the vet to reschedule the herd check. Cody? He brought a fancy fruit basket to the nurse's station, for show. That was the moment, right there in that fluorescent-lit cafeteria, that the crack in our family went from a hairline fracture to a canyon. I was dealing with the gritty, terrifying reality of possibly losing my father. Cody was already looking past him at what came next. He saw a problem to be managed. I saw my dad. I didn't know it then, but while Silas McCall was lying in that hospital bed, the clock was already ticking, and my brother, with his soft hands and hard eyes, had just started it. The air in Arthur's Boston office was still, thick with the smell of old books and polished wood. I sat there, Wyatt McCall, my hands clenched on my knees, waiting to hear my grandfather's final words. Across from me, my cousin Cody wore a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. Arthur, our family lawyer for 3 generations, cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses and began reading from a formal document. The last will and testament of Silas McCall, dated June 14, 2018. My heart was a drum in my chest. I, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the entirety of the Rocking M Ranch, its lands, livestock, and holdings, to my grandson, Wyatt McCall, to steward as I have. A wave of relief, so profound it was almost dizzying, washed over me. The ranch, home, it was safe. I looked at Cody, expecting to see defeat. Instead, his smirk widened into a full, ugly grin. "I object," Cody said, his voice smooth as oil. Arthur paused, peering over his glasses. "On what grounds, Cody?" "On the grounds that you're reading an outdated document," Cody said, reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a crisp, folded sheaf of paper and slid it across the desk with a flick of his fingers. "This is the true last will of Silas McCall, dated April 12th, 2023. The date hit me like a physical blow. Just 6 months ago. Grandpa had been frail then, but his mind was sharp, wasn't it? I was stunned, my relief freezing and shattering inside me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The ranch, the legacy I'd poured my soul into, was slipping through my fingers before I'd even properly held it. Arthur picked up the new document, his bushy white eyebrows drawing together. He read the first lines silently, then his frown deepened, etching lines into his forehead. He scanned the page, his lips moving slightly. I caught the phrases, "due to the proven financial mismanagement and neglectful stewardship of my grandson Wyatt," and "all assets in perpetuity to my grandson Cody." Arthur looked from the paper to me, his expression unreadable, then back to Cody. He didn't say a word. He just examined that paper, his frown a silent storm cloud in the quiet room, while my whole world tilted off its axis. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt longer than it ever had. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my mind replaying Cody's smug face as he'd wave those papers in mine. The last will and testament of Silas McCall, dated 2 days after the old man was supposed to be on his deathbed. It didn't add up, and I needed it to not add up. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital hallway hit me like a wall. I found the head nurse, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda, with kind eyes that had seen too much. I showed her the copy of the will Arthur had sent me, pointing to the date. April 12th. My uncle, Silas McCall, was here then. Is there any possible way he could have signed this? She took the paper, her expression turning grave as she read the date. She didn't even need to check her records. Mr. McCall was brought in on the evening of the 10th. Massive stroke. He was completely unresponsive, nonverbal. We had him on a ventilator by midnight. She handed the paper back to me, her voice firm and quiet in the humming hallway. By the 12th? Honey, he couldn't have signed a grocery list, let alone a legal document. It's medically impossible. The confirmation was a cold splash of reality. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a fact. I need a copy of his medical logs, the official ones, everything from admission to the end. She nodded, understanding. Give me a few minutes. I'll get you the certified copies from admissions and the ICU chart notes. It's all time-stamped. While I waited, I leaned against the cool wall, the weight of it settling in my gut. Cody hadn't just been greedy. He'd been cruel. To forge a dying man's name, to steal from his own family based on a lie scribbled on paper while Silas fought for air in this very building. The anger was a slow, hot burn in my chest. Brenda returned with a sealed envelope. It's all here. Times, dates, doctor's notes, everything. It's irrefutable. I thanked her, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. This was it. This was the proof Arthur needed to tear Cody's forgery to pieces in front of a judge. But as I walked back to my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Henderson, our nearest neighbor a mile down the road. Thought you should know, Wyatt. Cody's out at the ranch with a surveyor. They're measuring up the south pasture. Heard them talking about a swimming pool. I just stared at the screen. The audacity of it. I was holding proof of his fraud in my hands, and he was already at my home, measuring for a swimming pool. He wasn't just confident. He was already spending money he hadn't stolen yet. It made my blood run cold, then hot again. He'd gotten comfortable. He thought he'd already won. Well, he hadn't counted on Arthur, and he sure hadn't counted on these medical logs. I started the engine, the envelope of truth on the passenger seat. The race wasn't over. It had just begun. The air in Arthur's rented office was thick with the smell of old paper and strong coffee. We'd hit wall after wall, but Arthur, my lawyer from Boston, had that dogged look in his eyes. "The notary," he said, tapping the name on the forged will. "He's our pressure point." His name was Mr. Henderson, and he ran a sad little shipping and notary service from a strip mall. When Arthur and I walked in, the bell above the door sounded like a death knell. The man behind the counter, thin and wearing glasses too big for his face, went pale. He knew exactly who we were. Arthur didn't bother with pleasantries. He laid a copy of Silas's will on the counter, pointing to the notary stamp. "You logged this signature on April 12th. We need to talk about that day, Mr. Henderson." The man's hands trembled. He started with the rehearsed line, something about confidentiality, but his voice cracked. Arthur leaned in, his tone low and steady, not threatening, but inexorable. "We have hospital records. Silas McCall was in a medically induced coma on April 12th. He couldn't have signed a grocery list less than this." I watched the man's resolve crumble. His shoulders slumped. "He paid me cash," he whispered, his eyes darting to the empty shop. "Cody McCall, a lot of it. He had the document already. He told me just to stamp it and backdate the journal entry. He said it was a family formality, that his uncle would want it that way. He was wringing his hands now. He implied it would be very bad for my business if I didn't. Arthur had his phone on the counter, recording the whole confession. "And the journal?" Arthur asked. "I filled it in last week," Henderson admitted, shamefaced. "The entry for April 12th is a fiction." It was the first crack in Cody's foundation, and it felt like a dam breaking. But we needed more. From there, we went straight to the hospital. With Arthur's legal authority, we requested the security footage for the main entrance on the date in question. The head of security, a serious woman, brought it up on a monitor. The black and white footage rolled, showing the sliding doors, the coming and going of a difficult day. And then, there he was. Cody, walking in alone at 10:17 a.m. He looked determined, smug even. The timestamp kept rolling. He left 2 hours later, also alone. At no point did any lawyer, any assistant, or anyone resembling a witness accompany him. Most damningly, there was no sign of Silas, no wheelchair, nothing. Just Cody, orchestrating his scheme solo. Walking back to the car, the weight of the evidence was solid in my hands. Arthur's phone with the confession, and a copy of the security footage. The last will and testament of Silas McCall, dated April 12, 2023, was now surrounded by proof of its own impossibility. I looked at Arthur. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the ghost of a smile on his face. We weren't just chasing shadows anymore. We had the trail, and it led right back to Cody's doorstep. The papers felt cold in my hand, even through the thick manila envelope. I stood on the front porch of the McCall ranch, the same weathered boards I'd run across as a kid, and watched the county sheriff's deputy get back in his car. The taillights disappeared down the long gravel drive, leaving me alone with the silence and the document that threatened to erase my entire life. Cody's move was as brutal as it was predictable. The motion was right there in black and white. Petition for immediate eviction. He wasn't just contesting the will anymore. He was using his forged version, the one that named him sole heir, to have me thrown off the land. The hearing was set for 1 week from today. 7 days. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the rest of the papers. A separate court order, granted ex parte, had frozen every family account tied to the estate. The operating account for the cattle, the savings my grandfather Silas had meticulously built, even the household utilities account, all of it locked. I was a caretaker who could no longer care for anything. The ranch wasn't just my home. It was a living, breathing entity that needed fuel, feed, and funds. And now I had none. I walked back inside, the screen door slamming shut with a finality that echoed. I spread the documents on the heavy oak kitchen table, the same table where Silas had told me, the week before he passed, that everything was settled. "The lawyer from Boston has it all," he'd said, sipping his coffee. "Arthur, good man. It's all right there in the will." The last will and testament of Silas McCall, dated April 12, 2023. That was the key. Arthur had the original, but Cody had his own version, and he'd used it like a weapon to paralyze me. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. He wasn't waiting for a probate fight. He was going for the throat, trying to make me homeless and penniless before I could even mount a defense. The pressure was a physical weight on my chest. 1 week to prove a fraud, to find justice, from right here where my access to everything was cut off. I picked up my cell phone, my last lifeline. I had one advantage Cody didn't know about. I already knew the truth. I dialed listening to the ring, staring out the window at the land I was now legally forbidden from owning. "Arthur," I said the moment he answered, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "He's filed for eviction. I've been served. We have 1 week." The clock was ticking, louder than the old grandfather clock in the hall. The fight for my grandfather's legacy was no longer a distant legal matter. It was here, on this porch, in these frozen accounts. It was for my home. The air in Arthur's Boston office felt different today, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. I leaned forward in my leather chair, the weight of the last few months pressing down on my shoulders. Cody thought he'd won. He thought that forged will with my grandfather's shaky signature was his ticket to everything. But he forgot I had Arthur. "It's not enough to say it's a fake, Wyatt," Arthur said, his voice calm and precise as he steepled his fingers. "We need to make it a physical impossibility. We need to build a trap so airtight the judge has no choice but to see the truth." He laid out the plan like a general mapping a campaign. First, we subpoenaed the hospital's neurology chief. The doctor, Arthur called him. His testimony would be our bedrock, definitive medical proof that Silas McCall was medically brain dead on April 12, 2023. He couldn't have held a pen, let alone discuss the complex terms of a new will. "Then we go for the notary," Arthur continued, his eyes sharp. "We get an affidavit, and more importantly, we secure the original notary journal. That ledger doesn't lie. It will show the time of the notarization, or more likely, the lack of one." I listened, a slow, steady hope beginning to burn in my chest. It was clever, methodical, but Arthur saved the masterstroke for last. "The final piece," he said, a faint, grim smile touching his lips. "We let Cody walk into it himself. Under oath, in that courtroom, we will have him describe the signing. We'll let him paint the picture in vivid detail. The bedside vigil, the solemn conversation with his ailing father, the pen in Silas's hand. We'll let him place himself firmly in that room, on that specific date." He let the silence hang for a moment, the perfection of the trap settling over me. "Because when he does," Arthur finished, "he won't just be lying. He'll be describing a scene that medically could not have happened. His story will be standing in a room that, according to science, no longer existed for my grandfather. It will crumble under its own weight." I looked from Arthur's determined face to the copy of the last will and testament of Silas McCall dated April 12, 2023, lying on his desk. It wasn't just a document anymore. It was Cody's own rope. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just fighting back. We were building the box he would willingly lock himself inside. All we had to do was wait for him to lie one more time. The air in the courtroom was so thick you could feel it pressing on your skin. Every seat was taken, every eye fixed on Cody as he sat in the witness box, dabbing at his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Under oath, he gave the performance of his life. "My father had a moment of perfect clarity," he said, his voice trembling with what sounded like genuine grief. He reached for my hand, his eyes clear. He knew it was time to set things right. He signed with a steady hand. I just sat there, my fists clenched under the table. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I could see the jury hanging on his every word, some of them nodding along with sympathy. My heart was a hammer in my chest. Then Arthur stood up. My family's lawyer from Boston didn't look like much, thin with wire-rimmed glasses, but his voice was a blade of ice. "Thank you, Mr. McCall. Your testimony is illuminating." The defense calls Dr. Evan Finch. The doctor was all business. He presented the medical records, his words clinical and crushing. Profound, unresponsive coma. No recorded episodes of lucidity. On April 12th, and for the 6 weeks preceding it, Silas McCall was neurologically incapable of holding a conversation, let alone comprehending a legal document. The mood in the room shifted. The sympathetic glances toward Cody began to waver. Arthur then called the notary public, a sweaty, nervous man named Mr. Higgins. He barely looked at Cody. "He paid me cash," the notary whispered into the microphone before finding his voice. "He said it was an emergency family matter. I never saw Mr. Silas McCall. I falsified the journal entry and the acknowledgement." A gasp went through the courtroom. Cody's face, so perfectly sad a moment before, went pale and waxy. But Arthur wasn't done. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. Hospital security footage, time-stamped April 12, 2023. A screen flickered to life. There was Cody, clear as day, walking down the sterile hospital hallway at 2:14 p.m. He was alone. The footage cut to his father's room from the door's interior camera. Old Silas lay still, a machine breathing for him as he had for months. The time stamp in the corner was identical. Arthur let the silence hang in the still air for a long moment. He turned from the screen and looked directly at my brother. "You were there, Mr. McCall, in the building. But your father, as the medical record and this footage conclusively show, was incapable of being there with you." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The truth, laid out so coldly and completely, was louder than any yell. Every head turned from Arthur to Cody, and finally to the judge. The Honorable Margaret Vance removed her glasses, her gaze settling on my brother. It wasn't anger. It was something worse, pure, undiluted disgust. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That look said everything. The performance was over. The fraud was laid bare for the whole world to see. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot, and the entire courtroom seemed to let out a breath it had been holding for a year. The document purporting to be the last will and testament of Silas McCall, presented by the respondent, is hereby declared a forgery, the judge said, her voice cold and clear. It is null and void without any legal force or effect. I just stared at my hands, clenched on the table. I heard Arthur, my lawyer from Boston, exhale sharply beside me, a sound of pure professional triumph. But I couldn't look up yet. Then I heard the judge speak again. "Bailiff, please summon the sheriff to the courtroom." That got my attention. I lifted my head. Cody was still standing at his table, but the color had drained from his face. That smug, knowing smirk he'd worn since the day my father was buried was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed stare of disbelief. He looked over at his own lawyer, who was already closing his briefcase, avoiding his client's eyes. The courtroom doors swung open and 2 county sheriff's deputies walked in, their boots echoing on the old wooden floor. They approached the bench, listened to the judge, then turned and walked straight toward Cody. "Cody Jamison," one deputy said, his voice filling the silent room, "you are under arrest for the felony charges of forgery and the first-degree fraud and perjury. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights were recited, the other deputy took out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click-click as they locked around Cody's wrists was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. He didn't fight. He didn't say a word. He just looked hollowed out, a paper doll of the arrogant man who'd tried to steal my father's legacy. As they led him past my table, he wouldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, all his bluster and lies finally collapsing under their own weight. I watched them guide him through the doors, and then he was gone. The weight that lifted from my chest then wasn't excitement. It wasn't joy. It was a deep, settling peace. Arthur clapped a hand on my shoulder, saying something about filing the paperwork for probate, but his words were distant. All I could think was, "It's over, Dad. It's done." He'd tried to rewrite my father's story, to insert himself as the hero and make me a footnote. But Silas McCall's true last will, the real one, signed on April 12, 2023, the one that reflected his actual heart, had endured. The land, the legacy, the truth. It was all still here. Cody hadn't just lost in court. Every lie he'd built over the past year had just been publicly, legally, and permanently shattered. I stood up from the table, my legs a little unsteady. Justice wasn't a dramatic showdown on the ranch. It was here, in this quiet room with polished wood and the smell of old books, with the rule of law as the final arbiter. And today, it had spoken for my father. The sun was dipping behind the distant hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, the kind of sunset my dad would have called a working man's reward. I sat on the worn wooden planks of the ranch house porch, the silence so deep I could hear the creak of the old swing as it moved in the gentle breeze. In my hand was a single sheet of paper, crisp and official. The deed, not just a piece of property, but a promise kept. The dust from Arthur's rental car still hung in the air, a faint golden cloud settling back onto the long dirt road that led to the highway. He'd come all the way from Boston one last time, just to hand this to me personally. "The last piece of paperwork," he'd said, his sharp Boston accent softened by a genuine smile. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The fight was over. With the court finally recognizing my father's true last will, the one dated April 12, 2023, that Arthur had safeguarded, everything that was stolen had been returned. The law, slow as a winter thaw, had finally done its job. Somewhere, in a cell a few hundred miles from here, Cody was serving his sentence for fraud and coercion. The thought brought no joy, only a hollow sort of quiet. His anger was someone else's problem now. Out here, the only sounds were the whisper of the wind through the tall grass and the distant call of a meadowlark. The land was breathing easy again, the way it did before all the noise and the greed. I looked down at the deed, my name typed neatly on the line where his should have been all along. Then I lifted my gaze, letting it travel over the rolling pastures, the dark line of the creek, the sturdy barn silhouetted against the dying light. This view was my first memory, and, I realize now, the only one that ever truly mattered. I folded the paper and tucked it into my shirt pocket, right over my heart. I stood up, the wood groaning under my boots, and placed a hand on the porch post, the wood warm from the day's sun. The peace wasn't just in the quiet. It was inside me, a settled, solid thing I hadn't felt in years. "It's yours again, Dad," I said to the wide open land, and for the first time since he left, I knew he could hear me.